Hi, good afternoon. Here I am there to talk about something different, something that probably people are talking about, but in a different space, not so commonly, and if at all commonly, then it is more political than, say, anything to do with some information being shared in some different format. What I'm talking about is perhaps a future of business which will be decipherable in some decades, and that to talk about now may sound quite superfluous, but let me go back to something in history. If I look at the way business evolution has happened in history, from the time of industrialization, from the time of development of industries, what one sees is an attempt to dominate common people. This attempt to dominate common people is a necessity of power, and when you look at necessity of power, if you talk about business, capitalism is essentially an idea that comes to most people. Now, most of us who have been students of biology, when we talk about industrialization, we know about a genetic subject of mimicry in which we were taught about an example of a moth which, with industrialization and all the carbon footprints coming in, almost became an extinct species. And when industrialization went back from Manchester, it was seen that after some years that moth returned back. Now, this is just one example in science. More than that, what industrialization brought in was capitalism, as we read generally or we generally infer. And to say capitalism in those forms led to concentration of wealth in the hands of a few people is how we are taught. Even before that, wealth was concentrated in the hands of a few people, if we were to say, in the hands of monarchy, in the hands of lenders. So it was never something that industrialization brought about or industrialists got benefited specially from. The structure always existed. A careful observation also suggests that while industrialists did garner wealth in the course of time, they not only garnered wealth in terms of money, but they also garnered wealth in terms of people. And the quotient of loyalty could be seen across companies, across the board, when the next generation and next to next generation of the same family would join the same company. So, industrialists built upon people's wealth, industrialists built upon mass wealth, and that was their prime capital. This shifted its trends globally, with manufacturing getting concentrated to places where labor was cheap. So, in the aftermath of pollution having been deciphered as a major hurdle, and also costs of transportation, etc., and so-called developed countries coming to a point where they did not have much of a youth population or much of a population to engage with manufacturing in terms of labor, they shifted their bases to countries where there was cheap labor, there was abundant labor, so that the cost of production could be brought down. They still played by the same norms, they still earned the loyalty of people. The difference was they could cut down the costs of the manufactured product and make it a mass distribution. With the mass distribution, now these countries which were originally centers of production, they became centers of distribution. Across any distribution network, there are at every level percentages of earnings that are to be distributed or shared. Manufacturing by itself strives principally on the order that the manufacturer draws in on a percentage as his net output or his target, that at the end of the fiscal year he would have a certain percentage from the production as his earnings. Whereas the distribution network goes by margins, so it is more defined by value. A distributor will sell that product more, which gives him more value in lesser volumes of trade than less value with more volumes of trade. Now, this value based business first drives to cut down on manpower. Second, it drives to cut down on the space. Third, it drives to cut down on many players in the space. So concentration in terms of monetary wealth actually is achieved by a distribution network, a traders network, and this distribution or traders network strives to achieve this sometimes by ethical competition, sometimes by unethical competition, which could mean that compromising on quality, compromising on a push of quantity, and those quality and quantity conditions somehow drive the fact of value which the business wants to retain. This value over the years tends to add up, and when you look at the margins in terms of percentages, the percentage margins of distribution networks over the period of time tends to decrease and flatten out very early, which puts pressure on them because they necessarily are working on a value-based system to cut down workforce, cut down spaces, cut down other expenses to concentrate the wealth into the system. Now, when you see this concentration of wealth and the mechanism it brings about, on the human side, it definitely brings about a lot of discontent in the society. It also brings about a lot of unemployment, and it leads to kind of seizure of industries, because the pressure is on industries as of now when distribution networks are behaving in this pattern. While they cannot manufacture the same volume because they suffer trading losses in their go downs or on their manufacturing line, both in terms of raw material and in terms of finished product, manpower itself tends to keep growing costlier. Given this scenario, what has happened in the last 5 decades across the world is a shift from manufacturing to service industry, and the service industry has created a lot of unemployed spaces. Now, it is difficult to imagine an unemployed space to that extent, but that unemployed space is also being labeled as unorganized space. And why I would call it unemployed is because most of the unorganized space which trades, which performs services or lends services, is either unskilled or semi-skilled, and it suffers from a basic drawback of quality delivery, quality output, because it cannot afford the inputs of what a quality output means. This is an area which demands push, which demands encouragement if service were to survive. Perhaps a post-COVID scenario just brings this a lot more glaring. You have mass unemployment globally, you have people seeking jobs globally, and you have manufacturers looking for fresh labor, which is now available at a lower cost because the need for a job is much higher. And people are not in a position to invest in terms of money because they do not have enough money to actually run the service sector. But the mindset of the consumer has shifted from understanding the nuances and intricacies of manufacturing, which is a time-taking process, to a quick delivery and service model and a quick satisfaction model. Does that imply that manufacturing will be killed, or does that imply that servicing will be killed? The future is perhaps not for both of them to be standing alone. The standalone idea would rather mean that if you are a service provider, you have to have a manufacturing attitude, or if you are a manufacturer, you have to have servicing somewhere into your system. So while a manufacturer will strive to become a service provider along with, and if he does along with is when he can survive, a service provider will have to look at something in manufacturing to collaborate with, or else otherwise be defeated by the manufacturer himself entering into the servicing space. Because when the manufacturer enters into the servicing space, he does away with an additional go down space, an additional warehouse space. He does away with probably creating a new entity by itself. Rather, it just needs to create a department within itself, and does away with a lot of taxation and formalization costs. It also does away with a lot of legal costs. Now, looking into this possibility, which is not remote, which is quite likely, it will be interesting to see if manufacturers who can very easily step up to this will allow service providers to get into this space. Service providers to get into manufacturing will find it very costly because manufacturing works on very narrow margins. It only works on high volumes of production, which is a huge investment. So the way forward for service providers could be that they align with manufacturers, they get into tie-ups with manufacturers, and together they work out logistic models which aim at service delivery for the customer. When this happens, it creates a lot of room for doing away with a lot of mass production, which means if there is no mass production, there is no unethical competition. If there is no unethical competition, the price index becomes narrow, and the price index of the commodities is rather more stable and not driven by profits alone, but is driven by customer needs and customer orientation. This should prompt a situation where production will be customized. When customized production comes into space, it again raises the risk of joblessness. It again raises the risk of what you call as price inflation. Way forward perhaps will be, in that case, to allow employees to be working on as and when required and paid basis. You may not have a future where regular employment is in the space, be it a manufacturer, be it a trader, and the same person could be in different roles at different points in time, around the day, around the week, or round the month or round the year, and a multi-faceted individual with a capability to perform more than one functions, and an intellectual surmise of the entrepreneur to be able to harness such potential could be the way forward, and that would bring about, I would not say an end to capitalism because it cannot. The idea of business is centered around capitalism, but the transformation would be perhaps, instead of wealth, to a people's capital and a wealth capital in a balance, which somewhere is an alignment to the socialistic order of governance. This also implies that governments across the globe will have to switch their ideas of earning just from taxes, particularly direct taxes, rather than move to a place where they encourage more spending. It is often said that economies need spending and that's when inflation can come down. But spending by whom? Spending by somebody who is drawing a limited wages, or spending by who is drawing a limited percentage of income. A limited percentage of income allows the value of income to fluctuate and the person to spend as per his needs, as per his available money, and that also allows him to give to the economy a consistent percentage of his income back in all forms: taxes, investments, regular spending, luxury spending, whatever, based on his percentage of draw. But the person who is drawing a fixed salary does not have this distribution in the same order in terms of value. If he fixes the percentage, his value becomes fixed, and if he fixes the value, his percentages become fixed because he doesn't have any extra source of income. So entrepreneurship, business ideas which come up with chances for both the worker, the employee, the employer to collaborate and generate an environment where they work on fixed percentage drawings, fixed percentage models, and let their personal microeconomies of business, of households, take their own shape of spending, will allow the governments to earn consistently from the spending that these consumers end up doing. This would mean that the government would easily be able to meet their forecasts. Now, here, the only thing that the government can do to reduce the pressure both on the businesses, because they would have the higher volume of money and they need to spend back, and also the common man with the fixed salaries to be able to spend back, is to rationalize taxation anywhere in the world. And the taxation needs to come as close as possible. The gap between indirect taxes and direct taxes has to be as low and as minimal between the two, if possible, equal. The two taxes becoming equal will thus enable more cash into the economy, more spending, more vibrant consumer behavior, more demand, and more of manufacturing. So the cycle will need to shift both from the government and from the business side towards a point which encourages spending. While the government can enable it by reducing taxes, bringing them much closer to each other in terms of direct and indirect taxes, the manufacturer will have to, and the service provider will have to rationalize their existence into a collaborative environment. Thank you.